Okay, we're here with Phil. We're watching Gtrain do his rehabilitation. Phil, just a little bit of background on yourself. What's your gym called?
Gym's Life Force Fitness in Wodonga.
Yeah? And what are your personal accomplishments?
Personal or professional? Just personal?
Personal,
Okay.
professional?
Well, personal is as a competitor in bodybuilding. My personal achievements have been state, national, international, and world
Wow.
achievements. Multiple national, multiple international titles in
Saw some
bodybuilding.
awards on the wall over there. You looks quite sparkly on the awards over there.
Yeah, you've got a few trophies. The trophies don't really mean much. It's basically the achievement just to get to that level. As a strength coach or working with athletes, if you are not at the level that they are at itself, you don't have the confidence, the psychological confidence, the athletes themselves and yourself. Part of the training with my qualification, which is strength and conditioning, one of the major attributes is that is called hypertrophy or muscle tissue gain specific to the athlete themselves. And probably the ultimate sport for hypertrophy would be bodybuilding or natural bodybuilding, drug free. And that's basically why I went that way.
Excellent. Excellent. So we're here doing some rehabilitation as Gtrain, aka Daniel, he hurt himself at work. So what is the difference between doing rehab with you after the doctors and physio appointments are all finished up instead of just going back to work?
Good question. Physios are very, very good at finding an injury after it's occurred, and that's called acute injury. So basically what they do is they get the tissues or train the tissues to go back to what they were functioning like previously. And that's just basically movement patterns, and they're very, very good at that. My qualifications say that I have to bring someone back to superior performance. I have to get an athlete back to what they were before, and that's just not like your average human that basically it just has to exist during the day. That's someone that has to actually put a lot of force back on their musculature that has been compromised by the exercise they're doing or the pursuits that they've been following. So basically, once a physio has finished, sure, their movement patterns are there and they're well on the way to rehabilitation, but don't have human performance. The performance is not there. So basically, I have to get the performance back again. So I have to put even more stress on the musculature, and it has to be the right type of stress so they don't re-injure it again. Realistically, my job is to make sure that my athletes don't get injured. I have to do what they call prehabilitation. That means I have to make sure that they're strong enough so they won't get injured from what they're doing. If you look at most athletes that are at top level, they're $1 million athletes. There's a lot of money invested in these people. They can't go back just able to do what they can do. They have to go back and perform again. And I have to get their rehabilitation up to a level where they can exude that performance. They can do that performance.
Yeah, that's awesome. And that exists in as well as the athletic world, but also work lifestyle too, doesn't it?
That's exactly right.
Awesome. Thank you for that. That was a good answer. I like that. What are you and Gtrain hoping to achieve with this training?
Again, we're going to. He has an injury that's a chronic injury. That injury then needs to be addressed. It's been addressed by the physio, so therefore they've got movement pattern back again. What I'm trying to do is to make sure or ensure that it doesn't happen again. So basically, there's a reason this happened. It's either the environment he's been in, or he's got an imbalance in his musculature himself. So basically, what I'm trying to do is balance up all that musculature in the areas that have been compromised by the work that he's doing, and make sure that there's less likelihood that that'll happen again.
Yeah. And you sound pretty versed in this, so what is your history and qualifications on this subject?
My qualifications started with basically generally as a fitness instructor. Then from there on in, we had a couple of professors from the Australian Institute of Sport that came through that wanted to take it further, and they developed what they call the Australian Strength Coaches Association. Now this was basically done through various universities throughout Australia and block release. So what we did is we then went to train to be human performance specialists. so that basically we could work with any athlete for any movement pattern and improve that movement pattern and make that athlete better at what they could actually do. Now, part of that is rehabilitation with the athletes themselves, after the athlete is actually finished with the physios and the doctors. Now, from there on in, I started doing more and more rehabilitation through different courses that I did through the Strength and Conditioning Association. Eventually got to the point where I was lecturing through TAFE and university level at advanced injury rehabilitation.
Awesome.
So that was with the Australian Medical Association through La Trobe University,
Yep.
and I was working with the couple of various government instrumentalities through TAFE level, and that was Wangaratta.
Awesome. So quite qualified. Excellent. And can you run us through this program that you've designed for Gtrain?
Basically, the program is strengthening above the amount of strength he actually needs for what he's doing. If I use the analogy of someone shifting one object, and it's a percentage of their actual musculature, so we get something about the same size. So we get a brick and a box of tissues. Someone could probably carry a brick or push a brick above their head probably 40 or 50 times before they actually fatigued and couldn't do it any longer. But a box of tissues, they could push that box of tissues above their head probably all day and not fatigue at all with it. Now, that's relative strength. That means that the tissue weighs a certain amount, the brick weighs a certain amount. And it has, a detrimental effect to the musculature and its system to be able to continue to contract. Now, if you were to become stronger by using a heavier brick, then when you go back to that original brick, you'd actually be able to do very similar to what you were doing with the tissues. You'd be able to actually lift it above your head more times. Now, once a musculature starts to tire and fatigue, then you open up the likelihood of what they call chronic injury or long-term injury. Small micro tears within the muscle fibre itself that build up over time that you don't notice to start off with, but eventually it becomes long-term pain and discomfort. Now, that's chronic injury. And that's basically lifting something for a long period of time over and above the time frame that muscle's capable of lifting it. So therefore you start to change the movement patterns. You start to bring in other muscle groups that aren't really designed for that function. Those muscle groups then fatigue as well. And because they're not designed for that function, the chances of injuries are very high.
Makes a lot of sense, as he was a picker at the time of the injury. So makes a lot of sense, as he was picking for work at the time of injury. So that's picking a lot of different random objects of different weight varieties all day long.
That's right. Variety is very, very important with any long-term or endurance type injury, because or in long-term or endurance type movement pattern. If you can take the stresses off that area for a short period of time, place them somewhere else, and in ideal movement patterns, then that area gets a rest. So realistically, when we work with athletes, we don't work the same thing all year round. We do what they call a periodized program. Years ago with Olympic athletes, they found that more world titles were broken or world records were broken outside of competition, and the analysis was done to find out why that was so. And what they found is that most athletes were overtraining coming into their events. So then what happened is the scientific community or performance community now investigated and now set in place periodized type programs where they weren't doing the same thing all the time. They were working on specific areas at some times, then they'd back off those specific areas, just do enough to maintain it, then move into other areas. That works very well in any endurance type situation. So if you're looking at labouring type industries or time intensive industries, the same protocol should work. If you did a certain period of time at a certain type of movement, then move to another type of movement and another type of movement, then come back to the original movement, then the musculature that's involved in that would have time for rest, time to recover while you're working other parts of musculature, and then the same would happen for that musculature.
Yeah.
So the same protocol works for humans no matter what they're doing.
Yeah.
Okay. If you look at it, exercise is a type of work. Okay. Work and exercise are very similar. So training for exercise should be also training for work.
Excellent. So this rehabilitation actually would benefit everyone sort of struggling with injuries and looking at rehabilitation to get back into physical work.
Definitely, yeah.
Yeah.
Being stronger than you need to be means that you're cruising through what you do, rather than getting to a point where you're totally fatigued with that.
And burnt out.
There's specific ways to train for that. You don't just lift a weight. You have to lift the weight properly through a correct range of motion. Correct range of motion means that every bone that you work has an origin and insertion and the muscles that you use. If they're trained along that angle, less work with the connective tissue, because again, you're working in the ideal movement patterns, then the less injuries as well.
Excellent. Well, I'd like to thank you for your time today. You've been extremely helpful. We're going to go over and film Gtrain with the rest of his rehabilitation session today. So we'd like to thank you for coming on and giving us this information. It's very helpful. And hopefully we'll bring you on another time and do another interview.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye. So Gtrain, end of that rehabilitation session, first rehabilitation session, how do you feel?
Yeah, good. It's good to be back working my upper body. I've been missing it. It's been 7-8 weeks now, so yeah, it's good to get back into it. A lot lighter than I was doing, but yeah, still getting the blood flowing and the muscles are still there and they're feeling good. So just take it easy and take my time, make sure everything heals properly, and I end up getting stronger than what I was beforehand. So yeah.
Looking forward to it.